Yasmin, thank you very much for joining Secrets of Talent. Really appreciate you joining this conversation. I wanted to kick off this conversation with a question I've been asking a lot of the guests on Secrets of Talent, which is all about their first ever job, and how that sort of got you led to working in people and the people space, people operations.
Yeah, hi. So my first ever job, if we want to be super real, was as soon as I got my national insurance number at the age of 16. I was super hungry to work, always kind of wanted independence, and got a job in a local takeaway shop. And that's kind of how I was earning cash up until the age of probably 18. Then I moved into retail. I mean, didn't lead me into people, but kind of taught me that I love to work, earn money, and be around people. But hey, that was kind of my first ever job. I think my first job out of uni, so my first full-time job, was actually in a contact centre. You know, the times have changed now. When I left uni, having an internship wasn't paid, and if they were far and few between. So I didn't kind of have the privilege to go off and do that, so I had to just kind of find a job, get cash, and the quickest and easiest thing for me was in a contact centre. I mean, I didn't like it. The people were great, but I didn't like it. I learned very quickly that actually this is not for me. It taught me a lot. It taught me that actually this is the kind of place I don't want to be. But, you know, they saw something in me and gave me an opportunity to work in their people team on a few projects. And also go off to India, and I was there for 8 weeks with them and trained their staff as part of their L&D kind of people team. And it was kind of at that point I thought, I actually really like working with people, and supporting people to be the best version of themselves. And I think that's kind of when I thought, maybe I might explore a little bit more in this people HR career. There wasn't any opportunities there, so I left and got my first people admin job in the NHS, and that's kind of how I started my career. And 9 years later, here we are.
Did you learn anything about yourself as you were transitioning through them career roles?
Yeah, definitely. So I think I learned that I'm very resilient, that, I'm hardworking. So even though I hated the job, to be quite honest, I still gave it 100%, still wanted to go to work, do a really good job, be a good team player, come with positivity. And even though I was faced with lots of challenges, and it's quite difficult when you're not wanting to be there, I learned that actually I was really resilient and would still just give it 100%. And I think, I still carry those attributes to today. And even way back when I had my first job working in a takeaway shop, I think all those kind of skills, little did I know then, were coming out at that point as well.
Oh wow, that's amazing. Yeah, it's cool. That is. Yeah. This conversation is largely going to be around Gen Z, or if you're in America, Gen Z. But here we're in calling it Gen Z, and I wanted to kind of get your thoughts on what the difference is in hiring talent, and more importantly, retaining talent from the Gen Z era.
Yeah, so Gen Z, so I'm actually classed as a millennial, but work with lots of Gen Z, and, working with them, I think they're great. They're hungry, they're ambitious. I'm not saying other people from different generations are not, but as a generation as a whole, I see that. And I think in terms of what's different about them is they don't particularly have any loyalties. So I think, a generation above me, it was kind of, you find a job and you stay there for life. And I think my generation, it was kind of, you find a job, you stick it out for at least 5 years, you climb your career a little bit there, and then potentially move on. Gen Z are pretty ruthless in the sense of they look beyond the job. If the job isn't giving them their culture what they need in terms of, is it supporting their mental, financial well-being? What's the social impact that the job and the company are doing? And, what does career look like? They don't want to necessarily be somewhere for 5 years and their career development is going to take that long to get to the next stage. They kind of want to move quite quickly. They're ambitious, and I think it has a big influence on, the social media influences, the people who are in the public eye now. You've got big influencers at really young age doing big things, and I think they want a slice of the pie and come into the corporate world with that mindset, and I think it's great. But likewise, you know, you do see a higher turnover of talent, because actually, you know, they are maybe less resilient, or actually they don't stick it out long enough to know if they are resilient or to know what the end game is. But yeah, I think with Gen Z, in terms of hiring them, I think actually they're all about more than the job. So they want to know that actually they're coming somewhere and what is the culture. And I think that just plays into a little bit of what work is now. I mean, for some people, work and home is very separate, and maybe that is still the case, but I think times have changed where it's kind of like you're one person at home and you're one person at work. It's kind of, we are encouraging, bring your whole self to work, you know, work and home, why should they be different? You know, we want it all to feel just you and authentic. And I think, you know, Gen Z are very much so living that, and actually somewhere that doesn't support their financial and mental well-being, they're kind of like, well, I'm not going to go there.
That's a very interesting point. I think the dynamics have changed around Gen Z and that particular generation in terms of how they think of work. It can be and can't be about the brand of the institution, but certainly companies could be doing something about it, right?
Yeah, definitely. So I think companies have, you know, a great opportunity to attract this Gen Z talent, because, you know, they're creative, they're young, they're fresh with lots of ideas and bold and disruptive, and that's the kind of talent you do want in your company. Likewise, you do want people who bring a lot more experience, but I think striking the balance is really important. And I think what we're really good is seeing companies actually retain Gen Z, and what they can actually do to do that is, number one, looking at your total reward package. So what are we giving people beyond the job? So actually, what benefits do we have? So are we staying competitive in terms of, like, you know, the standard healthcare benefits? What are our financial well-being benefits? But then also looking at, like, your career progression. So do you actually have a career progression guide and ladder? Because a lot of these people who are coming into your companies who are Gen Z haven't had experience of knowing that progression looks like this. So do you need something that is a bit clearly mapped out, in the sense of, I need a ladder that looks like A to B, and we, you know, it's not necessarily always like that, but having a framework in place will, again, attract and retain that Gen Z talent. I think also inclusive policies. So lots of people, and I've experienced, come to a company and go, so what does your D&I policy look like? Do you have a D&I committee and a wellbeing committee? You know, is this agenda being driven from the top down? And what are some examples of that? So I think, yeah, inclusive policies. And that can look like things, you know, lots of companies are doing great things around hybrid work from anywhere policies. I think that's really important as well, like their time. So yeah, having companies like that, and then also your salary benchmarking, you know, like I said earlier, they don't have loyalties to a company. They're quite quick to move on, in the sense of, if the company or the job is not serving my purpose anymore, I'm going to move on. I'm not kind of, you know, emotionally attached to this job like other people or other generations may have been. So I think it's kind of making sure that you're salary benchmarking your jobs each year to make sure you're staying competitive, and using external companies to do that.
Do you think that the pandemic and sort of some of the things that came out of the pandemic regarding work from home and remote work, do you think that's impacted how organisations hire and retain Gen Z talent?
Not necessarily. I think it's for the companies who wasn't necessarily progressive around home working or hybrid working. I think actually it's proven that it can work, right? So a lot more companies have become progressive in that sense. So if anything, it's helped to attract Gen Z to companies who may have not been able to attract them previously, because they were like, you know, you have to be in the office 5 days a week. We need to see you present and here. So I think, yeah, I don't think it's necessarily changed anything massively. I think the companies who weren't doing it, who are now doing it, now open up the doors to Gen Z talent more so if they didn't previously.
Well, that's a good point, because I think, interestingly, a lot of companies are now moving towards having that hybrid approach, but there are growing voices around organisations saying, we want more people in the office than kind of working from remote or working from home, which is quite interesting. I think that dynamic is still yet to be figured out. I think a lot of companies are still trying to kind of overreact to an overreaction from the pandemic. But kind of moving on to, and probably my final point, which is around spotting potential. We briefly spoke about this earlier today, as before this conversation around spotting potential. But how can a company spot potential amongst Gen Z talent, particularly, as I mentioned, in a post-pandemic world where things have changed?
Well, that's it. So things have changed. So where people might have been able to go out and get some work experience, or, you know, be able to like get jobs and actually get those kind of interpersonal skills, that's a little bit different now. So I think you need to look beyond kind of, okay, they've kind of been to this uni or they went to this school. You know, you need to look at how someone going the extra mile, who's hungry and wants the opportunity, more so than like what's on the piece of paper. Because actually, I think the last 3 years has changed everything, and people are now being a lot more creative, and actually people who wasn't given the spotlight are given an opportunity. So actually lots of companies, for example, down in London are now opening up their doors for talent all across the UK. So actually where someone in, let's say Manchester, that's where I'm from, wouldn't have been able to get a look in a London company, but now because they're working hybrid suddenly can. So actually your talent pool is opened up massively. And you know, for people who are early on, so Gen Z into their career, they don't necessarily have like lots of work experience on their CV. So I think it's looking at how they go above and beyond. So how they react in an interview, how they actually trying to chat to you to actually get the interview. What are their LinkedIn profiles? So yeah, they might not have lots of work experience, but are they talking on subject because that's what they're passionate about, and they're going above and beyond and trying to go that extra mile. If they went to uni and actually on their CV, it kind of says, you know, I worked on a project and these are the skills that I got from it, and you know, trying to really draw out on what they've actually done besides work experience. And I think, yeah, people who necessarily don't have lots of work experience but actually are really hungry, and if you get those people into an interview, I think, yeah, they potentially will work so much more hard for the opportunity, because actually they know how hard they've worked to actually get to this point, so sitting in front of you to actually get an interview. And I think sometimes they value it a lot more. But yeah, I think in terms of like spotting good talent, it's people who go above and beyond, right? And I've always said that, like what someone's CV says isn't the full story. I think meeting people, getting a sense of like their personality, speaking to them and seeing what their drive and motivators are, a really good indicator.
Yeah, and I think one of the things I noticed in this conversation and some of these conversations around hiring early talent is the fact that having remote work actually democratizes the playing field, because people can now have access to jobs that were no longer access to them. As you mentioned, you're in Manchester. If there's a job in London and they require your skill, they can access your skill because the flexibilities of work is there and available to them. Yasmin, thank you very much for this conversation. Really appreciate your time. I think there's a lot that I've learned about Gen Z talent as well. I'm still learning around Gen Z talent hiring and retaining Gen Z talent, but I think that this is a very good starting point for myself and those who are listening in.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely fine, and thank you for having me. It's been great chatting. Thank you.
Really appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
Okay.